Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out podcast, the show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations to follow their dreams of career fulfillment and to live their best, most authentic lives. I'm your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast couldn't be possible without the support of Careerminds. Today, I'm excited to welcome Romain Sestier. Romain is a serial entrepreneur, and he's the co-founder of StackOne, an integration platform for HR Tech SaaS companies. He graduated at the top of his class from the University of London in marketing and business. Romain is originally from a small town in France and has such an interesting story of dropping out of school to learning English, then to relocating to California and joining Google as a product manager, where he led the creation of $1 billion product. I had the pleasure of first meeting Romain in Chicago earlier this year, where we both attended a private birthday party at the House of Blues. I was fascinated by his story, so here we are. I'm really excited to share his journey, so without further ado, please enjoy Romain Sestier and his clocking out story. Romain, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Hey, Raymond. Great to be here.
So the universe works in mysterious ways. Here you and I are. You're in London. I'm dialing in here from Philadelphia. And we met earlier this year in Chicago at the House of Blues for someone's 60th birthday.
Yep.
And yeah, so we were having a conversation and you were sharing your really interesting story about your time at Google and how you transitioned out of Google to launch your company, StackOne. And I found your story so fascinating and was like, you have to join the podcast. And so I really appreciate you carving out some time. I know you're super busy running your business and, just really grateful for our time here today.
No, it was great. Really enjoyed our initial conversation. I'm excited to be on the podcast. And on top of that, we have similar sounding names. So, this is all great.
Oh, I love that. That's great. Well, what I like to do, Romain, is start with a little bit about your background, where you grew up. Our listeners love to hear kind of the personal side of who you are. And so, why don't you tell us where you grew up, a little bit about your parents, what they did, and we'll go from there.
Oh, absolutely. So in case you can't tell from my accent already, I'm French originally. So I just grew up south of Paris, not far from Orly Airport, actually. It was I come from a small town, but very close to a lot of big universities in France. So think of it as if you had sort of like Harvard and Stanford kind of all in the same valley. And luckily my parents decided to kind of settle down there. So grew up in a very sort of sciencey oriented, all my friends' parents worked as researchers. My mom's a teacher, primary school teacher. My dad was actually a software engineer. And, back in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, started working as technology enhanced translation, which you think of it as got GPT nowadays that it sort of translates and or speaks all these languages, and you had Google Translate. But before that, he was kind of working in that. And, growing up in that background, I was exposed to computers really, really early on in my life. So I remember as early as probably 8 or 9 years old, I was already playing video games or some games on computer. I was making HTML websites and kind of learning HTML. And I think that's really where I started just coding consistently. And I have 2 younger brothers, and the 3 of us just really loved computer. We always grew up around computers, and that was kind of it. So I was self-taught developer. I definitely never had any formal training as a developer, but always very, very, close to technology. I also, my mom being a teacher also for some reason loved school. I was one of those students that, tries to do everything by the book. So that's kind of what I was doing when I was growing up. And I loved just the idea of how do you you teach someone like everything? Like, it's just there's so much to learn over like so many years. I know it's so random, but like I used to think about that when I was a kid.
So super interesting around your mom being a school teacher. And it sounds like you grew up in a family that supported your interests. You talked about playing video games at such an early age. And one of the things as you were talking that struck me is here in the United States, one of the first questions that kids are asked when they're at a very young age is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I feel like it's a question that is asked not just by your parents, by your aunts and uncles and your parents' friends. It's always like, Roman, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it sounds like,
Sure.
I just wonder if that question exists in the French culture, and, what kind of pressure do you have as a young kid as you're growing up, wanting to you're thinking about, what do I want to be? What do I want to do? And it sounded like video games and computer engineering and those types of things was of interest. But I just wonder, that question, is it something that is part of your culture, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, by your family, absolutely. You're asked what you want to do, and my family was very supportive of all sorts of hobbies. I mean, I did loads of different things. Outside of school, I was doing drama. I was doing like lots of sports. And it was all like, my parents never pushed me to do any of that. I was just, I played the piano a lot, just because I really enjoyed it. And actually, that was sort of, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot for the longest time. I was fascinated, and still am, by military planes, and then decided became more risk averse and wanted to be an airline pilot after that. And then I thought, oh, but wait, I don't want to be traveling all the time. So I decided to, give up that whole like flying thing.
That's great.
The second thing is, the school system. I don't know that it's as strong in the US as it is in France, but you have to make choices very young about that are going to determine your path in life. Like, I think as early as 14, 15 years old, you have to sort of pick a path, whether you're going to go down more like a science route, or like a economics and business route, or like more literary and sort of arts route. And I feel like it's a young age to have to pick that. Like, you don't necessarily know what you want to do, but yeah, you're definitely conditioned to start making choices pretty early. And I wanted to be I wanted to be a taxi driver. I wanted to be, like, honestly, a lot of different things.
That's great. So what did you ultimately do in terms of your choice? What career path did you choose, and what was the influence of that?
Yeah, so that's kind of related to me dropping out of kind of postgraduate school in France. I started studying, essentially to become an engineer, like a chemical engineer or structural engineer. And I decided that I didn't want to spend my life just doing this. And at the same time, I met my girlfriend, who's now my wife, but she's British. And we started communicating, and she was based in the UK. And I was like, I once, just took my parents out for dinner. I still remember that day. I remember the exact restaurant. And I told them, like, thank you so much for everything. And, like, I'm not asking you, I'm just telling you, but I'm dropping out and I'm moving to England. I don't know what I'm going to do yet.
To follow a girl.
To follow a girl, but also I think there was also a drive in me to, like, learn English. I didn't speak English until I was like 17, 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I wanted to sort of just explore, travel a bit. And I took a gap year, essentially just working in a cafe, just learning English. I didn't know what a latte or a cappuccino was. I wasn't a very good waiter, but I still, I think it was a great experience. And then I just signed up for the same university that my now wife was at, and it was a fantastic experience. And I chose business studies because I wanted to have more variety, but I still maintained a bit of math and statistics in there.
So, Roman, I have to ask, take me to that night. You're sitting there with your parents over dinner, and I can only imagine how nervous you could have been, because here you are, you're you're going to school, you're going down the path that ideally your parents are like, this is great. Roman's our oldest child. He's chosen his field. And here you are sitting down and telling your parents, Mom, Dad, I'm dropping out of school. I have a girlfriend. I'm moving to London. And how did they react to that? And what was the life lesson there?
Yeah, to be honest, they were very supportive at the end. I mean, it was hard for them. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like, oh, they were like, oh yeah, great. Like, just like throw your life out. A lot of my teachers actually at that school, the postgraduate school, it was one of the kind of top sort of engineering schools in France. The teachers tried to prevent me from making that decision. They actually called my mom and asked her to come in and be like, hey, can we talk about this? Like, what's going on? But I was dead set on. I think my mom, out of anyone, knows that when I've got my mind set on something, I just do not give up on it. So I think she knew that regardless, I was going to be fine. And it wasn't like an easy thing for them to agree to, but honestly, to their complete credit, because I'm a dad now, I have 2 young daughters. I don't know that I would have the same reaction to them as they did that night. But without that, I wouldn't have done what I've done so far.
Well, I have to say, first of all, kudos to you for, following your dream. I think that oftentimes, people who have a dream or want to pursue something are scared to have that conversation. They don't want to let their parents down. They don't want to upset their parents. And oftentimes they'll continue down a path because they want to please their parents or please someone in their family. And the fact that you talked about clocking out, the fact that you did that and you ended up in London, you went to the University of London, and you graduated in the top 3% of your class. The drive that you have is I could see that in terms of you pursuing your dream, and you were going at it 110%. So kudos to you for doing that. And so when I think about your journey, you graduated with a degree in marketing and business. You're obviously an entrepreneur. Were you always interested in starting your own business? And how did you think about going into the working world and ultimately getting to the place where you're going to launch your first company?
That's a really good question. Yes, I think I don't know. I never thought like, oh, I just want to be an entrepreneur in those terms specifically. But I always loved building things and starting things and working with people and just doing something. I have an itch. I just always constantly have to be doing something. Even at university, I was. I remember like I built. You didn't have the sort of like. I forget the name of the apps in the US, but Deliveroo, the food delivery apps didn't exist back then, right? And I remember building like a very simple system. It was in PHP back then, which I don't even know if I could code in PHP these days. So restaurants could essentially like take orders online and it like send them an email at the time. Plus, I don't even know how to send an SMS via my server. To let them know, hey, you've got an order. And I, never really went anywhere, but I always wanted to build something. And so when I left university, I knew I wanted to work in business, specifically marketing, but I loved the data side of marketing more than the like creative, more like advertising side of things. So I became a data analyst for a product called Maximizer, which got acquired by Oracle, and that was my first real job in the marketing technology industry. And my job was basically to analyze data about web visitors on e-commerce and travel websites to understand, when you do A/B tests, why specific changes perform better than others. And I loved that job. It's honestly one of the best jobs I've had.
How did you find it?
Yeah, it's a good question. My wife actually just randomly stumbled upon the fastest growing startups in London, one of those articles. and sent it to me, and I was just like, oh, that sounds interesting, I'm just going to apply. And I was rejected initially by the company, and then the recruiter called me back um, for the same role but in a different team, and I got in.
Wow. So you leverage your networking, you were bold, you reached out, you got the job. What ultimately was it leaving Oracle that led you to starting Upper.ai? And what
So
was the big idea there?
yeah, so I'll kind of do a very quick summary, but acquisition happens, things start slowing down. You get an acquisition, it takes a long time for a company to get absorbed. At the same time, there was this French company called Content Square. The CEO reached out to me and the former VP of sales of that company, Maximizer, and said, hey, do you guys want to open the UK office of my company? It was super fast growing in France. They were expanding to their first country abroad. I co-opened the office of that company for a few months. And then I decided it was a great experience, but one of the things that I struggled with was being in a satellite office. You're not directly involved in the sort of like core decision making of the company, and I decided to leave and create my own consultancy. And even before doing Upper, actually, I just started consulting as a data analyst in marketing, and so that was great. I consulted for the Pottermore website, which is the Harry Potter website. I consulted for some websites around financial institutions and so on. So that was going great, and then I realized I wanted to build again. And one of the people I had met at Maximizer, who's now, by the way, still my co-founder to this day, he's my co-founder at StackOne. I reached out to him and I said, hey, do you want to start a company? I just really remembered loving the interactions that I had with him back at Maximizer. And the idea was, as a consultant, I was answering the same questions all the time. And my clients were marketers, so they were always analyzing the same data sources. So their Google Analytics, their database of products, their, whatever, like any other like product inventory management systems. And I thought, well, they don't have time. Sometimes they don't have the knowledge of the tools themselves to go and get the answers to those questions. And at the same time, you had this early days of natural language processing, which I thought is the perfect storm to essentially create like a Google-like search experience for your data. So you can just type a question in natural language, like how many visitors did we have last week? And it would translate it under the hood into an API query, go and get the data, and then present a report, like actually format the data in a visualization and tell a story, analyze the data. And what we realized, Guillaume's my co-founder, Guillaume and I realized the data sucks a lot of the time. Like the data quality is not there. It is not possible to fully analyze data automatically because a lot of the time you get changes in the way the data is tracked over time. So you can't do comparisons. You get like different names in different systems. So you have to reconcile them. So we decided, we're selling more like services of cleaning data than actual product. We still grew the company to about 100K in revenue, but a lot of that was actually still services based. And that's when we both decided to join Yieldify.
So I have to unpack some of that. So first of all, when you left Oracle, you joined sort of a startup. You were like number 2 or 3 employees to launch a business. So it almost, before starting Upper.ai, it kind of gave you a visual of what it's like to launch a company. You obviously quickly recognize that you can do this on your own. You thought back to a friend and coworker who you had complementary skills, launched Upper.ai to solve a problem of analyzing this data. What was the result of that? It sounds like you grew it. What, like thinking back, what did you learn? What were the challenges? And ultimately, it feels like you kind of like got out of the entrepreneurship, went back into sort of the corporate world, so to speak. And I just wonder if you can share what was the challenges and the result of that startup that you learned from it.
Great question. the biggest learning we got that we directly applied to StackOne was to stay extremely focused on the problem we were trying to solve. And in fact, we didn't do that in our first startup. We tried to solve too many problems at the same time and ended up not having an end-to-end use case kind of really solved very well. And at the same time, it was the two of us. We were 22, 23 years old. Didn't have enough experience to go in front of like VCs or anyone who was going to trust us with like a few $1 million to make this happen. And to be honest, they were right, I think, not to. And that's when we decided, look, let's get a bit more experience, see how it's done at a few other companies, and then get back into it. And we knew, I think Guillaume and I both knew we were going to do another company at some point. It was just a matter of when, not if, really.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, there's so many lessons there. Oftentimes, entrepreneurs who are just starting out, there's this desire to want to chase bright, shiny objects. And when you're starting a company like you did with Upper.ai, the tendency is you're starting with an idea. And then as you're starting with an idea, you're like, oh, but we can do this. And then we can do this. And then we can do this. And then over time, your identity starts to morph into a company that has really left their why. And it's such a big learning lesson, I think, for people who are listening that are thinking about whether they want to be consultants on their own, start a new business, really identifying what is your purpose in the work that you're doing and staying true to that. There is something to be said for going narrow and deep and being the expert at one thing versus being, having a little bit of knowledge in lots of things. So you go to Yieldify. Tell me a little bit about your journey. So you did two companies. You went to Yieldify, then you ended up at Google, and just really interested in what did you pick up there that you didn't already have, and share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So my journey at Yieldify was, I started as the head of data, meaning I was essentially owning the data product within Yieldify. Became then the head of product, and then the head of product and services, and then the VP of product services, and I had engineering as well. So part of the reason was some people left, and it was a temporary position that they sort of gave me a lot of scope. But I was managing 2/3 or 3/4 of the company at one point for a period of time. I think what I gained the most, I got to touch a lot of different aspects, sales, customer success, product, engineering, a lot of things that I had done before, but on a bigger scale. But to be honest, the thing I got out of this was the relationships that I built during that time at Yieldify were extremely strong. Primarily, in fact, the CEO of Yieldify and founder, Jay Radia, was then the first Czech in StackOne further down the line. I built a very, very good relationship with him. And a lot of the engineers that I was working with and managing are now working for us at StackOne. So I think that was honestly, at the risk of sounding cheesy, the relationships that I built and the people that I met there were the most valuable thing that I still, benefit from to this day, more than any of the products or customers or anything like that that we worked with. But I also happen to experience the problem that I'm solving now really, head on.
Yeah.
I think from that perspective, it sort of shaped us a little bit as well.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's cheesy. I think that your time there, you probably didn't realize it at the time, but as you're starting to add value to the company and build your experience, the relationships along the way, really play it forward. And the work that you're doing today, it just becomes invaluable where you can just pick up the phone and call someone, whether you're asking for advice or you're looking to hire someone who has a certain skill set. And so, for entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting a business, I think the experience is one thing that you gain as you're thinking about potentially a company that you're solving, but getting out of the office, so to speak, and building relationships cross-functionally at a
Oh
company
yeah.
is so important. And oftentimes I think people, get so myopic with the work that they're doing, and they only communicate with their team or the people in the functional
Hmm.
area. And if you can take a moment and really stretch outside of that to network and build relationships, even later in life, whether you're looking for another job or starting a new company, so invaluable, building that network. And I say that it adds to your social capital in
Hmm.
terms of your impact that you can deliver later in your career. And so, yeah, I really appreciate how you articulated that. Why did you leave Yieldify?
Yeah. Things were going well. I mean, Yieldify was growing, but one thing that I really wanted to do at some point, my wife and I wanted to do, was live in the US. And Google had approached me. A recruiter from Google just reached out essentially, and just said, "Hey, we're looking. Your background sounds interesting. We're looking for product managers. Would you be interested?" And they essentially offered to pay for the visa, the relocation, the like move me to California. And I was like, I can't turn this down. It was a difficult decision because you always want to like try and build more, and there's always things that are unfinished in some ways, but at the same time, it was such a good experience at Google that and life experience to live in the US for me, that it was fantastic. That's the reason I left, really.
Were your kids born at that point?
My kids were born in the US,
Oh,
both
wow.
daughters. Yeah,
In
so I didn't
California.
have to move them. In California. They're both born in Mountain View.
Nice. How old
Yeah.
are they now?
So they're 1.5 and 3.5 years old, which is another, by the way, like interesting thing to do. Balance the startup plus the kids at the same time.
Oh my gosh. So you moved to California. You started with Google.
Yeah.
You had two kids. And so tell us what it's like. What was that job like? And what did you learn?
So Google, you sort of join and you have this sense, I think, at least personally, my sense was overwhelming sense of like, you have so much at your disposal. It really is like this, like in the movie where you like have all these benefits and you have like the huge campuses and buildings everywhere. It takes some time, I think, at least especially from a European person, to sort of get used to that scale. Once you get past this, I mean, it was a phenomenal experience. So I was initially on a team called Sales Intelligence. Sales Intelligence is a subset of Google's inbuilt CRM, which runs the entire ad sales organization. And in Sales Intelligence, I was responsible as a product manager for building some new features that helped sellers to sell more efficiently and more intelligently, sometimes using machine learning, sometimes using automation. And one of the products I built there essentially resulted within, and we A/B tested it, as we launched it, resulted in $1 billion incremental revenue for Google per year. And that was, over a period of 18 months. And so that was a really interesting experience because I learned, yeah, and in fact, my boss from that team is one of our biggest investors today as well. But I learned so much from her in terms of super, super high quality product management and product management thinking. I did, like, a good example is like I did over 100 user interviews in a period of like 90 days in a quarter. It was just because, I wanted to like do it to the maximum, and I learned so much on, obviously there's ways that is helpful. There's sort of it plateaus at some point how helpful it is to do that many user interviews, but great experience. And then after that, I left that team to go. I had an opportunity to essentially co-found a project within Area 120, which is Google's incubator for existing employees who have been there for over a year. They essentially give you, some budget, and you have 6 months to demonstrate progress and viability of your product. And every 6 months you have a review until essentially you get acquired by one of the business units within Google, and ours ended up in Google Shopping.
Wow. So you were really able to tap into your entrepreneurial spirit there. Did you
Yeah.
realize that that opportunity was going to be there when you started, in terms of this, like this new opportunity that you moved into as you were going through the interview process? Were you going in with a bunch of unknowns around what is the future going to hold there? I mean, is that something that's typical at Google? And it just feels like it was like the perfect scenario for you.
It's a very good question. I don't know if you know how the process works when you get hired into Google. You essentially get hired for a position, product manager, but you don't know which team you're going to be hired for. So you get the offer, you sign the offer letter, which is conditional on you finding a team within the company. So I had no idea going through the interview process which team I was going to fall into. And then I went through the team matching process. So I spoke to a few different teams and ultimately found a really great fit with ads. The entrepreneurship experience was only something that I learned about after joining Google. I didn't know this was something that they did, and it was, I felt really aligned with my character, and I really wanted to do something like co-founding a project within Google with Google resources, infrastructure. I utilized some of Google's internal machine learning research as part of that project. What an opportunity, right? I couldn't pass that. It was just such a interesting experience that you wouldn't get anywhere else.
Mm. Okay, so the $1 million question. You're at Google, you're there for 3 years. Like, who leaves Google? Like, that's like the utopia of companies to work for. They move you to the United States, you're starting your family, you're living in California. What could go wrong?
Yeah, I think it was a fantastic place to work. It was genuinely a really, really fantastic place to work. So it is, I would have been happy staying there in some ways. But I think there's, I don't know, when you ask people, why do you jump off a cliff to do like base jumping, things like that, it's just like, you like the adventure, you like the adrenaline, and I was kind of missing that. And my co-founder at the time, this is another factor that really sort of pushed me. He was going through the acquisition of Yieldify. He was still there, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yieldify was being acquired, and I thought, well, this might be the best of, and my project was coming to a close as well, and they shut down Area 120 actually around that time. We had Jay, the former CEO of Yieldify, kind of saying, hey, I'll invest in you guys. Guillaume, my co-founder, was available, and I was like, well, my project's coming to a close, so this is kind of the perfect time to actually make a move. If I'm going to make this move, it's probably now or never. And that's when we decided to start it. And I was still in California when we started StackOne for about 6 months before I moved back to the UK. And it was, it's been a really amazing journey so far.
Sounds like that was a tough decision. And one of the things that I often think about is, what is the catalyst that pushes someone to making a choice, to make a change? And it had to have been a tough choice for you, because you're at one of the largest brands in the world, and you're making a ton of impact in the role that you're doing there. And I would imagine, even though this project was coming to an end, they were probably already thinking about, where can we invest in Roman next? Where within Google is going to be your next level of impact? And I bet there was a real struggle to make that choice, while everything seemed like all the stars were lining up and it felt right. I'm sure there was a voice in your head that said, they moved me here. And you question whether California was the place that you were going to raise your family. And I imagine you were grappling a little bit with that. And I wonder if you can share with folks who have that kind of similar struggle in terms of making that choice, even though it's so obvious, but it's not an easy choice. Like, that's taking you back to Europe. and starting something from scratch, essentially. Like, that's a tremendous amount of risk.
You're right. It's a really good question because there is never a really clear answer. When you're in it, it's only in retrospect that you kind of think, well, in retrospect, it was absolutely the right choice to make, or I'm very happy with that choice. But when you're in it, it can be really daunting, especially because, so as they actually were shutting down Area 120, which was another kind of catalyst, which was like, well, I need to figure out something else. I did have an offer from another team within Google to go back. So I did have that on the table. But, I was, they're really, for me, it was just like thinking 10, 20, 30 years in the future, would I regret it if I didn't try this? And what's the risk? It's like, yes, I have kids. I think a lot of people sort of see that as a heightened risk. But I'm like, you're gonna fall on your feet. Like, you'll find a job. You'll figure it out. Like, you just have to take that risk. And I think I've just always really enjoyed taking a risk when it was betting on myself, rather than when it was taking a risk betting on other people, pulling through. And for me, I would say that's probably the key difference. Is whenever I took a big risk, it was always, do I trust that I'm gonna make this work? And it was kind of like, I'm betting on myself. I'm not betting on other people kind of doing something for me, if that makes sense. So I don't know if this is a really helpful distinction for everyone in these situations. That being said, for me, it was that was honestly like one of the main decision factors when I was like, I think I can do this. I've got what I need to then be able to bet on myself.
Roman, I can only go back to that dinner with your parents because you bet on yourself that night. Like, you had a really tough decision that you needed to drop out of school, and you had this tough decision. You bet on yourself and you followed a dream. You moved to London, you graduated from college there. And I can only imagine that, that early decision, that risk that you took. I mean, that is a huge risk that you took. Playing that forward, I feel like, gave you the confidence that you needed to make even a bigger bet. And I can only, like, that started at a young age, I feel like, and you're continuing to play that forward in your career. I mean, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, not everyone is this way, and I think at the end of the day, it also puts a lot of pressure on you to kind of deliver for yourself. But that's how I work, and I enjoy it. I think I tend not to get very stressed by things. I think I always sort of rationalize situations and think, well, there's got to be a way out. There's got to be a way forward, and to make this happen somehow.
So was the idea around StackOne already percolating while it sounds like you were at Google and you were sort of thinking of this idea? So you obviously leaned into that. You co-founded this company with your friend, your colleague from the past. You moved your family back to London a few months in. So tell us a little bit about what's the big idea? What does the company do?
So my co-founder and I actually went through so many different business ideas before we picked StackOne. And we looked into gamified SaaS onboarding all the way to sustainability and kind of carbon credits. And so it was a very wide range of things that we looked into. And, after really trying different things, we played around with early day GPT kind of a lot. We decided one of the principles, we needed to settle down on something. And we said, we want to pick a product that is not a nice to have. We wanted something that was a really core problem for a lot of people. And so we sort of started looking back at our own experience and we always worked at software vendor companies, like SaaS companies. We always worked on, at least touched the engineering and product sides. And one of the key things that we always faced since day one at our companies was integrations. And what I mean by that is, you sell a product to a company, that company is going to expect your product to connect to their other systems that they've already purchased, like you're selling a lead acquisition product, they're gonna want it to connect to their CRM. You're selling a benefits system, they're gonna want to connect it to their HR system, and so on and so forth. So there's always this need for integrations kind of everywhere. And the experience of building integrations for us was a very painful one, because we had built 50 integrations for over 1,000 clients, and we needed to essentially maintain a team of 15 full-time employees just managing these integrations. And to us, it was like, well, there's got to be something better. So we started looking at different integration platform solutions. None of them really solved the problem of that scalability of building a lot of integrations for a lot of clients that are very demanding and enterprise grade. And that's why we started StackOne. So the concept in very simple terms for StackOne is, think about it as a Google Translate for APIs. So instead of having to learn as a software company how to speak the language, the APIs of every single tool that you want to integrate with, we unify them and we translate them to a standard that we call a unified API. So instead of having to integrate with 10 different HR systems that all work in different ways, we unify the way that they work, so you only have to build that once. So you save a lot of time, you go much faster on your go-to-market, so it sells well to the CTO because they're happy not to have to do all this themselves. Also sells really well to the CEO, the CRO that wants to expand their SaaS business very quickly.
I love that. I love how you connected it to the Google Translate. It's almost like you've created your own unique language that all the systems can, it's like you're the middle person where you created this single connected tissue that provides an easy way for all these systems, because it, in whatever industry you're in, there's software, there's all kinds of software. And so the fact that you've created, and it's interesting, your name, StackOne, it's like there's one central language. So love it. Right. I think it's, so what's your biggest challenge today?
Biggest challenge today, I would say, is probably hiring. One of my investors very early on that I spoke to, someone who's now sold his company, and he's I really personally got on with him. One of his principles and one of the things he said he regretted the most was not focusing enough on talent density, and that term talent density really stuck with me. We actually reject a lot of candidates just because sometimes we're like, are we just too demanding? But we sort of decided to set the bar really, really high, especially for all these early hires that we have at the company. So I would say it's a challenge, like for every company, to attract really high quality talent. But for us, it's also like maintaining that bar and not compromising even when we really need to fill that seat, so to speak.
I think that's really important. I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, as an entrepreneur, when you're growing a company, the need for talent that has the capacity to sort of grow into their role, and you're not feeling like you need to hire one person for every couple of skills that you identify as critical, because then ultimately, it sets you up for having to lay off, which is ultimately not the goal. And so it sounds like you're being really thoughtful around your hiring plans of the company. And the other thing I just want to point out, which I'm sure now that you're back, you're starting this company, I'm sure your parents are just delighted that they can see their grandkids probably more regularly than having to fly to California. So it sounds like it's sort of a win-win situation all around.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the family component was a big decision factor in coming back to the UK, beyond, the company, obviously, which was another one.
Very nice. So Roman, we're going to share all of the information about your company and our show notes. But as we wrap up, what's the best way people can find you?
Yeah, a couple different ways. Main one is our website, stackone.com, is the best way to find information about the company and reach out to us. But definitely feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. I try and share as much helpful content as possible around building SaaS integrations, and just generally, my learnings along the way.
That's great. Well, I shared before our conversation that I'm going to be in London in probably 4 to 6 weeks. So we'll have to get together, and really appreciate you joining the podcast today, sharing your story. Super inspiring how you sort of navigated the corporate world and, followed your dream to the US and back home. Really, really grateful for you carving out the time today. And I think our listeners appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Raymond. It was super enjoyable.
Awesome. Thanks. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Careerminds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. If you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well as on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future and think it's time for a change, I would encourage you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.